Welcome to the Iron Self podcast, where we jump into health, fitness, mindset, and becoming the best version of yourself. Today with your hosts, Mike and Kayla Minion. On today's podcast, we welcome Nasyim Segal. She has been an ICF executive coach, a real estate broker, a numerologist, a caregiver, a backseat driver, a balloon saleswoman, and a pie maker. She lives in Houston area with her spouse, her dogs, and an old cat and some mosquitos the size of small birds. As a coach who's certified in behavioral neuroscience, she coaches caregivers struggling with chronic stress. In addition to coaching, Nasyim runs a small personal chef business in Houston that provides much needed nutrition and companionship to senior citizens. Nasyim often speaks to the power of hope. You can easily find her in the kitchen laughing at her own jokes or online at nasyimsegal.com, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Please, with a warm welcome, put your hands together for Nasyim. So welcome back to the Iron Self podcast. We are so excited to have Nasyim with us today to share her knowledge and expertise really on a variety of topics. I mean, you are just so well-rounded. We are just excited to jump into this.
Great. Thank you for having me. I'm so pleased to be here with you guys.
So today we are talking about how to live a long-lasting, meaningful life with the value of having hope and having a greater purpose. And I think that this is a topic that so many of us can resonate with, and so many of us can help use, I think, the tools that we're going to share today to really step into the best version of themselves and really begin to take back the power in their life and live the life of their dreams.
Well, and I think this is a powerful episode today because of everything that's going on in the world right now. Hope is one of those things that kind of unites everybody, and being able to bring that common element from so many different walks of life to really create hope.
Absolutely. I agree with you guys, obviously, and that's what I'm here to talk about, is how hope can be a beacon for so many of us who feel lost or out of sorts in our lives, or even when we're trying to achieve goals and you get into points where you plateau, or points where you're just like, is this really the right direction? Do I need to pivot? And I think that whenever you're able to readdress and reframe the situation that you're in, and have a little hope infused into that, it definitely will help you get to where you want to go and help you achieve what you want to achieve.
100%. So let's start from a place of what is a long-lasting, meaningful life. Because we've talked about this on previous podcasts, where a lot of the time what happens is we all look forward to retirement. That's like, we're all excited. Like, I'm going to do this and this and this and this when I retire. And so often we've talked about where it ends up being disease management at that point,
Right.
versus having that longevity, that fulfillment in retirement. So, what would, between the two of you even, what would you guys define as what is a long-lasting, meaningful life?
So thanks for that. That's such a huge question, right? And so I think that me being 40 years old, full disclosure, I still have a lot of life ahead of me, but the benefit of my experience, that being one of a coach and also a caregiver, and now currently helping a lot of other caregivers and folks in hospice and so forth, is that I see where what we assume to be a meaningful life for, I think, the majority of the world has to do with our external materials and what we're able to acquire and who we're able to acquire in our lives, in a very egotistical way. And whenever you get to a point in your life when you kind of met that threshold, or you get to a certain crisis point where there's no turning back, whether it's a health crisis or loss of a loved one, or who knows what else could happen, I think that's when you start to let go, and you see that you can't really live a fulfilling, meaningful life if you've got all of this baggage on your back. And the baggage being, these material things that we all strive to acquire. And I can say that again from a coaching perspective, because having coached a lot of senior level C-suite executives, they get to the peak of their, or the pinnacle of their career, and they're looking back saying, what was it all for? So I have seen both the development and the achievement side, and I've also seen the latter part where it's now about life and death, and it's now about not how much I have, but who is with me in the room, and what kind of value do they bring, and how do I improve and give them value as well.
So something that's just standing out where you're saying there is like the quality of the years that have led up to the end, like where you're saying it's like, you know, you're getting to the hospice settings, you're getting to like at, you know, well after retirement and things like that, and you see the changes in perspective from these high level people that were like, you know, I spent my entire life amassing all of this stuff that at the end it doesn't mean anything. Like it starts to put a focus on where they might have had a better time spending that time, which brings focus to, you know, people that are still in this race, like yourselves and like us, where, you know, we're 30s and 40s, and we're trying to amass this as well. When you start to be able to appreciate the day-to-day stuff rather than just focusing on that end goal, focusing on retirement and learning to live in the lives that we have now and enjoying the now, if that makes sense.
Right. And I mean, I have a very weird trajectory in my life. Things definitely didn't turn out the way I thought they were going to be in many respects. But I know as a young person who came from a very difficult, strained family home with a lot of financial pressure, that I thought achievement and acquiring things was the way to happiness. And so I spent probably the first 20 years of my life trying to achieve and acquire. And I had a fairly decent amount of success in that. But at some point, I realized that no matter how many things I had, no matter how many pair of shoes or how many trips I took, you know, all over the globe, just because I was searching for something, I still wasn't happy. And no matter what other people would say, like, oh, you have everything, and oh, I envy your life, and things like that, it felt fake. It felt, I mean, it was nice to hear that in the moment, but then later you're thinking, I'm in this big house and all by myself, and I'm looking in empty rooms with no people and no one to talk to, and, you know, there's that lack of bonding. And I think that really is the glue to help us live those really fulfilling, achieve so many more things. So live a fulfilling life and also achieve many things. So yeah.
It sounds like
Go ahead.
it sounds like you're talking about the importance of relationships and how developing or establishing those bonds are so critical to our long-term happiness. So whatever that bond might be, it might be with a person, it might be with an animal, whatever it is, but how those relationships at, you know, closer towards the end of our life are really how we begin to define our happiness, our success, whether our life was meaningful or not.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of what I'm hearing too is like you need to be okay with the person on the inside too, right? Like learning to start here and then work your way out. And this is something that we talk about all the time is if you can't truly love yourself, then you're only going to ever be giving a shard of yourself to everybody else. So really starting on the inside, finding what makes you actually happy. Because I can say from my experience, I spent my entire, you know, teenage years striving to be the popular kid, right? Like it didn't matter what else was happening. I surrounded myself with people, and a lot of those relationships were very shallow relationships. Just me searching for something from the external, right? Instead of finding it in here first. And it took me years to figure that out.
I think that's part of the fun, though, is the adventure and the exploration. You know, and loving yourself is such a huge thing as well. I mean, we talk about you got to love yourself before you can love anybody else. And to get to that point where you even realize that, wow, this is true, pure love of self, not in an egotistical way, but in a way that's deep and meaningful, and, you know, willing to go into those deep, dark places in your heart and explore those and say, this is part of my whole being. not reject it. I think we actually had a conversation about this previously where we talked about, how do you start to love yourself if you've never done it before and you don't really know what it is or how to do it. And we talked about puzzles and, it's like taking one piece and just focusing on that and saying, okay, what are the possibilities here? How does this really bring me joy? This is a piece of me. Can I love this piece? And slowly building on that. And eventually you get to a point where there's total bliss and fulfillment and self-love. And whenever you get to that place, it's very easy to project that to other people.
I think one of the things that we like to say is that, like, you need to really start removing judgments on yourself, because there's a lot of judgment, especially before you kind of hit that point where you are okay with yourself. We tend to place a lot of judgment, have a lot of high expectations on ourselves. Again, something we were just joking about at the start of this podcast before we started recording was, Kayla always says to me that I got to lower my standards because the judgment is so high sometimes. And it's true. And it's being able to kind of peel that onion back and be okay with everything, right? And learning to lower the expectations and release the judgments that we have against ourselves to be able to step into our power and be able to really start to enjoy our lives.
Well, nobody has really ever critiqued themselves into greatness, right? Like, you might critique yourself if you're playing a sport, like, how can I improve? What did I do really well? Like, that's called reflection. Okay, but it's not like berating yourself like, oh my gosh, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And I think that that's so often the mindset that we get into, and we focus on that negative aspect rather than that positive.
So again, releasing those judgments.
But I want to journey back to the piece where you guys were talking about love and that self-love component. I also had a really troubling childhood, I'll say. And one of the ways that I was always shown love from my parents was they would buy things for me. Whether that would be food, like a special granola bar, like the kind that had like the yogurt on them that were like, you know what I mean? Whether it be like something that was food related or something that it was just like a monetary item that they would just purchase for me to show me love. And so for the longest time, I thought people showed love by giving me things. So the way that I would show myself love was to give myself things or buy things. And I mean, it put me in a bad financial situation over time. But I didn't.
I really love myself.
Right? Well, right? But the thing is that at the end of the day, all I had was things and stuff, and I didn't love myself. There was I was constantly judging myself and berating myself, and maybe I got a new pair of jeans, but they weren't a name brand jean, or you know what I mean?
Right.
It still wasn't ever good enough.
But again, it was self-judgment. There wasn't somebody else saying your jeans aren't good enough or anything like that. That was again.
But maybe it was self, and it was definitely self-perception too, I think, because then you're going, oh my gosh, I'm not showing up the way the world expects me to either.
Well, and that's an interesting point because, I mean, comparison and self-criticism, self-judgment is actually a very natural, hardwired part of our brains. And we have a tendency to notice the differences, and they can come out as critiquing or criticism of self and others often, but that ruminating part of ourselves, if we don't harness it and reel it back in, then we can end up in severe debt or never feeling good enough, or having that imposter syndrome that people talk about so often. But having a healthy dose of judgment or criticism is good for you, because to your point, it's not so much just focusing on the negative so much as it is, well, how can I improve the situation that I'm in? So if I go back to the puzzle, you might look at this puzzle piece and say, this is so random. There's really no value here in the way that this is shaped or developed. And if you spend a few minutes and you consider the possibilities and say, wow, but it's such a unique piece and it can bring so many positive things into my life, So I think that there definitely is a need for balance between hypercriticism, hyperjudgment of self, which again is hardwired into our brain, it's hardwired into our system. So it's not something we'll ever be able to totally extract and get away from and throw away even, but it's definitely something that we can improve on, and incremental improvements And I know, as we were talking about, lowering your standards, I think that the Buddhists have a great way of looking at things when they talk about wanting and grasping. And it's the want and the lack of fulfillment sometimes that keeps us in those negative spaces, because there's always that comparison of, oh, well, I don't have the name brand jeans for my current society and my current community, but if you took that same person and put them across the globe in a whole different place, I mean, that name brand may not be good enough. It might be something else. So you'll never have total fulfillment there,
It's
Um,
all about perception.
for
It
sure.
really is. It's all about how we perceive the world defines our reality, right? And so if
Yeah.
we start to begin to accept all of those puzzle pieces of ourselves from a true point of acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean that it's good, it's bad, that I like it, that I don't like it. It just means I accept what is.
That it is, yeah.
Like I'm just accepting it
The
as it is.
acknowledgement. Yeah.
The acknowledgement that this is just how it is right now.
Acknowledgement without judgment. That's
Yeah.
mindfulness. That is what the term mindfulness translated means.
Right, and just beginning to be the observer rather than the storyteller, right? When we step out and become the observer of our self-talk, of our relationship with self, the self-love, of our journey in general, right? When we step back and look at, what does my day look like? What does my week look like? What does my year look like? We become that observer, and that observer is, I think, key to defining us, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I love that the comparison thing came up, because one of my other favorite quotes is that comparison is the thief of joy, right? Like having to keep up with the Joneses all the time is the thief of joy. You'll never have enough. You'll always be wanting. There's always going to be that want, that perceived need for more. When the reality is, if you look at your life and like Kayla's saying, you take a step back and look at the broader picture, you can say, no, I actually live a pretty fantastic life. Like overall, I'm able to feed my family. I'm able to live with, within my means and with people that I love sharing my time with, and being able to enjoy what you have instead of always comparing and always looking for that extrinsic, like that outside view of, am I good enough for somebody else? That shouldn't matter to anybody.
So when you deal with high level executives, and even for yourself for this matter, how important is it to begin living in your truth and living in your honesty to create that long lasting fulfillment?
I think that is the key to the lock. So you can't really open that door until you get to that place. You can function, you can have a life, you can still coast, but to get to that deep place of meaningfulness, I think you have to take those steps and go into those dark places. And I'm looking at some notes that I wrote about this topic specifically, because I was thinking about it over the course of the last week, specifically for our conversation. And the analogy I came up with was planting seeds. So I do not have a green thumb, but I decided this year I'm going to try to grow some tomatoes or something. And so I got some seeds out of a packet and I planted them. And you get like 25 or 30 seeds per packet, but they tell you don't expect them all to grow. If you have 2 or 3 or 4 sprout, you're doing a pretty good job, And it got me thinking about how we live and that barrier that we have. And I think most of us are seeds still and hard shells deep in the soil. And that we're not able to break through that darkness. The weight of that darkness, the weight of comparison, the weight of unloving ourselves or not knowing how to love ourselves or not loving others keeps us from actually sprouting and growing. But once you do start to sprout, and once you do start to really see the possibility and that things are different, they don't have to be hard shells that never explore anything. Once you get to the surface and you have all the glory of the sun and the warmth and the nutrients from that, I think that there's no turning back. So I think what you're saying is
the
very
key word that
important.
you said there is possibility. I love it.
Well, and I think that ties in beautifully with hope, right? Like we were talking about from the start of this, is like that hope, that that joy that comes with it, the ability to really put yourself out there. I don't know, Yeah, to me, it's like you're watering those seeds with hope, right?
Beginning to live in that possibility that you will grow, that you will break through that darkness, that you will see the sunlight at some point.
Well, and it's that power of positive thinking, right? It is, yeah, it is
Yeah.
all that is pure.
It's what I wrote as kind of an underlying factor here is it's transcending the mindset of survival and going to a whole nother level. And I think fear, in my mind, is the opposite of hope. I'll leave this up for a debate, but I believe that fear, the acronym fear is FEAR, so it's false evidence appearing real. And so our brains can't always tell for sure, is this a real survival issue? Is this a real, concern that I should focus on and be threatened by? Or is this imaginary? We don't have the capacity to totally be able to judge those things in the moment when they're happening. Reflecting on them, of course, we can. But I think when you focus on fear and you're only fearful, which I think we're seeing around the globe with so many people who don't have the emotional muscle to manage their circumstances that they find themselves in. So we have rioting, we have police shootings, we've got all kinds of stuff going on right now. It's crazy. I think if there was more hope, if the hope that humanity is actually good and that there is a bigger reason for these things, that there's a bigger puzzle here, I just have to get through these difficult pieces, I think that the whole world would be able to exhale and take a little chill.
The collective breath.
The collective breath, exactly.
For myself, this is something that really hits home for me, because when you were talking about going like from surviving that survival state, and for so many years, I'm gonna really say up until recently, I have lived in this place of fear around, losing people's love. What do I need to do to get that love, right? Because like I said, it was all material based before. And so once you feel like you've got somebody's love, well, if I share this one aspect about myself, what if they don't love me then? And it was that fear of living in my truth, that fear of living who I was, in not being accepted, I think is really where it came from. And I said to myself, I actually was journaling, I was like a week or two ago, and I was like, screw this. I'm not doing this anymore. I am going to start living my truth with who I am, and I'm not going to apologize to anybody anymore. This is who I am, accept me or not, but this is the true version of myself. And what I've noticed is that my energy levels in these last couple of weeks have shifted. My focus has shifted, my vibration has shifted, and I've started to bring more into my life of what I truly want. Because Mike even pointed out the other day, he's like, the reason why these things are taking off is that you're just sharing with the world who you truly are now, as opposed to hiding
who you
little
thought
pieces.
They wanted you to be.
Yeah, but I was maybe even now I'm still not sharing everything, but I'm not feeling like I have to hide certain aspects of myself anymore. And I think that that's really where the power started to come into me, where I'm like, I'm living my truth. Okay, I feel good about this. I actually like this person because these are the things I enjoy. Like, this is who I am, and it's empowering, right? And I get to live in that aspect of possibility. I don't have to worry. You know what? It's possible that people might not like me, but guess what? It's also possible that they might. And at the end of the day, I don't have anybody to be like, okay, well, I need your approval in order to feel good about myself.
And
because she has that the approval coming from inside now. I love it.
Exactly. And I think that goes back to what our topic was, longevity and having a very fulfilling life. And I think what I have seen in dealing with folks that are now at the latter end of their life is that those moments of insecurity that we all have, I have had them too, and I still do, but not as great an extent anymore. But, that is what we live on for so many decades in our lives. And it's like just the very end when we get to the point where we realize that these things don't matter. The people outside of us, they don't matter in the sense that their approval is great, but it's not going to fulfill you. It's not going to shift your energy, if I could use your term. What will shift your energy and make you happier is that self-reflection and self-love. And so I think it's important that people realize when we're talking about goals, we're talking about having healthy relationships, we're talking about having a healthy body, healthy mind, healthy life, and living in a fulfilled place. It's fulfilling yourself. It's feeding and nourishing yourself, not just with food or exercise, but on a emotional and also spiritual level. And it's a journey. It's a marathon. It is not a sprint.
And I don't think that that journey ever ends. So, I think once you start truly accepting yourself, truly believing in yourself, and finding that self-love, it's a daily battle. Like, you don't just wake up every day and you're like, I freaking love myself today. This is going to be the best day ever. Like, I think that we all you still have those aspects of self-doubt, self-criticism, whatever. Like you said, that voice doesn't go away.
Right.
But it's part of the process. It's like, okay, well, I can choose which aspect of myself I'm going to listen to, and I can also choose what I give the power to. And so, you know what? I might have a shitty day. I might have a day where I want to, I'm going to play woe is me for a while, and that's just the way it is, whether it's like, hormonally, that crazy time of the month, right? Or whether it is just the fact that, it's not a great day. And that's okay, and knowing that that is just part of life, but that doesn't mean that I can't begin to compile my pieces and start building that puzzle again throughout the day, or even the next day, or whatever. And that's where that aspect of hope is. It's like, even in my darkest times, even in my darkest thoughts, there's still hope. There's still a tiny beacon of light that is there that, I will try to grasp at, and that in order to live my best life, I'm going to keep grasping for it. I'm going to keep reaching for it, even when I'm struggling.
Right.
And I think sometimes that aspect of hope is the people in our lives, those relationships, like just reaching out to a friend and saying, hey, I'm having a bad day.
Right.
Or, hey, I just need a hug today, like whatever that is. And I think that since social media and all that kind of stuff has come into play, we've gotten away from picking up the phone and saying, I've had a hard day.
I think the definition of community has kind of changed since social media came out, because community used to mean your group of friends or group of colleagues or whatever that is that you physically saw all the time, right? You were in contact with them, whether that be at school or in social settings. And then with social media, the idea of the community has expanded, because now you can have a community of like-minded individuals that are on other sides of the globe, and it doesn't really matter. Like, you can have those expanded communities, I'll call them, but a lot of the face-to-face, the old school communities aren't what they used to be, because there's a lot, like, even the friends that you do see fairly often, you spend a lot more time on on your phone, like social media, talking back and forth, or text messaging, rather than the face-to-face like it used to be.
And we're more connected than ever, but we're actually way less connected than ever, right? Our relationships,
a little bit of a disassociated connectedness.
When you get to the end of your life, and like you listen to these stories that a lot of people will tell. Like, I talk to my grandma all the time, and she's telling me these stories of all of like the things that have taken place in their life, and these relationships that she's had, and how meaningful they were. But they were all like in-person situations, and now, what does that look like at the end of our life, where, a lot of our contacts are virtual?
Yeah. Well, and again, being able to give that hope, that community is easier than it's ever been, like we were saying, but at the same time, is it at the same level, right? Like,
I don't think most people find it as accessible.
Well, I think what we're talking about here is intimacy, and intimacy in the way of friendships and family relations. And someone had said to me many years ago that intimacy means into me see. So it's like you're ripping open your chest and exposing yourself, and this is who I really am. And can you work with that, which I think ties into what we're talking about throughout this conversation. But again, going back to human nature, I agree that this new technology, this internet, this amazing thing that we have has brought so many great people together that may have never had the opportunity to connect before. But it does start at home. if you're looking for those intimate relationships with your friends, your neighbors, you have to go knock on your neighbor's door and bake those cookies and, you know, send a welcome to the neighborhood cards, and, you know, do have those children play together, and that actually stimulates us, and it creates new neural transmissions, it creates new neural networks, it helps us to thrive, it helps us to process information better, it actually gives us the ability for empathy, which is so significant in building healthy relationships. So I think everybody knows this at this point, but technology has its limits, and I believe that the pendulum has, you know, swung so far into, oh, everything's digital now, technology, and what we're realizing is that we're killing part of ourselves. We're killing the human part of ourselves.
Missing the human aspect.
Right. And to your point, as far as longevity is concerned, they've studied this. They've studied you know, people at the end of their life, the centenarians who live to be 100 plus, and they have, you know, figured out exactly what is needed to live a long, fulfilling life, and relationships and having friendships and people around you is really at the core of having a very long, healthy life, emotionally, physically. You know, it's like I said, it's life sustaining, just like food or water.
Well, I think it gives you that purpose, something to live for. Like when you've got those relationships, we have that greater purpose. Like for example, like when we were younger, we did a lot of dumb shit. Like we did a lot of stuff that like
we would go cliff diving off of anything that we could cliff dive off of.
You know, like just like stupid stuff. Like in our early 20s.
Thank goodness YouTube and all that wasn't around when I was younger.
Oh my gosh,
there are some very questionable videos of myself when I was younger. Luckily, an old friend of mine probably has them back in Ontario.
And there's ones on CD.
There's some on the old compact discs.
But the thing is we did a lot of dumb stuff back then, and since having kids, I look back and go, I definitely wouldn't do that now. Like, but it changes that perspective, because I said to Mike, he said, well, why wouldn't you do that now? And I said, because I have way more to live for, right? So I have way more purpose, way more drive, and
because of the relationships
I have. And at the beginning of this conversation, you know, I said that it doesn't matter whether the relationships are with an animal or a human. And I want to give the example of like my grandmother. She's going to be 93 here in February. She lives at home by herself, and my aunt does go and help like make meals and stuff like that for her. But her greater purpose is her dogs. She has 2 elderly dogs because she refuses to adopt young dogs.
She said she doesn't need puppies, she needs dogs that are as old as her.
So she has 2 elderly dogs, but her purpose is to get out and walk these dogs every day.
She's 93 and she walks 5K every day with her dogs.
Every single day she will walk with these dogs, but they give her that purpose and that meaning in her life, right?
Well, and they bring her joy and companionship and love.
Right.
And I think that that's really what we're talking about: the joy, the companionship, the love, the intimacy, the whole human aspect, and how really all of this is driven by emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we boil it down at its core, this is all emotion, and emotion is energy and frequency. And so it's like, what emotion are you putting out to the world around you? What emotion do you want to feel in your life? Because that feeling, like when we talk about happiness is a fleeting state. Joy is the emotion that comes with it, right? So how can you create more of this in your life? Because this is where we get that feel-good endorphins, those feel-good feelings, that fulfillment, that true fulfillment. If you're ready to make a change in your life, step into the best version of you, check out our Iron Self Transformation Program. Find more info on our website, www.ironbodycoach.com.
Well, and then the other side of that, like we were talking about before with the fear, was, you know, again, with the emotion and the fear, is feeling it but not becoming it, right?
Right.
So there's both sides of that. There's the positive emotions where you want to be able to feel them and enjoy them and live in that state. And then there's the negative ones where you want to feel them, experience them, but then move on from them.
And I think, Nasyim, you would have the most knowledge around this, but when it comes to our brain and how our brain perceives emotion, I know a lot of people are either driven towards pleasure or driven away from pain, and that's kind of what we're talking about, is driven towards joy or driven away from fear. How does that relate on a neurological perspective? Does our brain begin to hardwire in, if I'm constantly being driven away from fear versus driven to joy, am I going to notice all of the more things in my life to be more fearful of?
Is that where the focus begins?
Yeah, I think your brain is it's a muscle, and it grows, and it does have the tendency to want to make connections, and those connections become stronger and stronger and stronger the more that you use them. So the more you have the same emotion, the more you reenact the same terrible relationship, no matter who the boyfriend is, or no matter how mean and aggressive you are with people, but you get your way. So it's like there's a positive after all this negative. So like your brain starts to create these neural networks. And I think Brene Brown actually has a great example where she says, imagine your mind is a forest that's never been touched. And whenever you start to create these neural networks, whether it's a positive or negative feeling, you start to cut a pathway in the forest. And the more frequent you go down that pathway, the more the brush is going to be cleared. And what your brain is a little lazy sometimes, and it likes to take the easiest way. So if the one way that works is, pound your fists on your chest and scream at the top of your lungs and get your way, that's what you're going to do over and over again. But it takes someone who is really, I guess, consciously aware, or as the term you used, an observer, to say, wow, is this really the result I want? Because although I get my way, the physical manifestation of that is, will I have cancer later on because I've harbored all these really negative feelings, which is, pumped all these negative chemicals into my body so frequently that my body's been inflamed for years because of all the stress. And because of that, I also have bad sleep habits, bad, food habits, and, it kind of starts a whole cycle of being out of balance. And so, yes, to answer your question, your brain does react, and your body reacts to how you feel different emotions. And the more you feel certain emotions, the more your brain and body are going to be attracted or addicted to feeling those different things.
I love the forest analogy. I think that is spectacular because I love the idea that the brush, like I can totally envision it, right? I know it, I get it.
Yeah.
But I think that this is such a great thing when it comes to manifestation. I mean, you mentioned it briefly there, is like we can begin to manifest the life that we want. We can begin to think about whatever the reality is that we want to bring into our life. And that comes with that feeling of the emotion, and that comes with, redefining that path. So just because that path is a little windy, right, doesn't mean that we can't redefine it. And you talked about how it snowballs, right? So when we're not feeling great, we maybe don't eat it as great. And then, oh, all of a sudden I've got chronic stress and I've got inflammation in my body that relates to disease in my body, that, it's one thing after the next, and it just completely snowballs.
Right.
But I think that the big takeaway here is that we have the power to stop that snowball.
Yeah,
we have the power to say, no, this isn't going to be the way that it is. I just think about like the big snowball on Aladdin. I watch a lot of Disney movies, but you know how it's coming down, and then like him and Abu, like they duck in there and they hide in the little keyhole. And I think that's the vision I get when I'm thinking about the snowball effect. It's like, no, you can just let that snowball go over you because you have the power to change.
Yeah. I think that a key here is to realize also that there's a couple different states that you may be in at any given point, which can really influence how you're going to feel or how you're going to react in a situation. And the first one is if you're hungry, to notice if you've not nourished yourself, if you're feeling cranky, hungry, or hangry, they call it, I think. Hungry, angry. If you're really pissed off about something, that's probably not the best time to start making decisions about lifelong goals. Lonely, because isolation and loneliness does cause your body a lot of not only depression, and anxiety, but it causes inflammation in your body, or if you're tired. And there's been so much research about lack of sleep and how it impacts your life and how it can actually shorten your lifespan if you don't get enough sleep. So if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, all four states put your body and your brain into an inflammatory state, and it's not really the most opportune time to be, again, making either short-term or long-term decisions. So you need to check yourself, especially whenever you're going to, say, like a heated board meeting or heated discussion with your spouse, and make sure that you're coming into those situations in a more balanced place, because that'll give you a chance to be successful. It'll give you a chance to really recognize that, I could make a better decision in this situation. I don't have to go down that same angry pathway in the forest that I've gone down so many times. Let me try something different.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that speaks beautifully to the, feeling an emotion rather than becoming an emotion, because when we allow the emotions to take over and then we try and deal with any situations in those heightened emotional states, I'll just say productivity goes down. The ability to reason and think with a clear mind, you really do need to come into it with a clear, open mind.
Well, and I think that comes into how our brain works, right? When we're in those states, our amygdala is firing in our brain as like an alarm system.
Survival.
Yeah, and the alarm is going off. I mean, like I've been in those situations where I've been like crazy hungry, and it's like tunnel vision. I can't focus on anything but food, and if that's the case, then anything that gets in my way of food is going to get moved out of the way, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Well, our brains are great at survival. Like to your point that you said earlier, right? Our brains are there to make us survive. It's the same thing when I was firefighting before, and you go into a building. If you're not consciously aware of everything, you are focused on the seat of the fire and nothing else. But then when you start to learn how to, cope with that, and then you can take a step back and look at the whole scenario, it opens your eyes so wide.
Yeah, another analogy, I guess, for the people out there teaching their teenagers how to drive a car. We, as our natural state, our natural inclination is just to look at the edge of the car and make sure that we're staying in the middle of the lane. But we know, as drivers who've been driving for decades now, that it's better if you look ahead of you and look around you and be aware of your surroundings. And if you're not taking care of yourself, whether it's lack of relationships or you're diving into your feelings and letting them run away with themselves, what you're doing is you're just looking at the front end of your car, and it can cause a lot of car crashes. So, yeah, definitely, I would say part of living a balanced life is to be able to step back and look at the whole picture, look at the whole puzzle, and don't just judge a situation by that one puzzle piece.
100%. And I think I loved how you kind of said, loneliness can impact our body as well.
Right.
And a lot of the time that loneliness is a felt feeling for us that we, acknowledge in our body. And sometimes it's self-imposed. And I think that self-imposedness, I want to say, because I have been definitely guilty of doing this, where I don't reach out to people out of fear. It's not because I don't want to be around people, and that I don't want to feel lonely, but it is terrifying to me to reach out to somebody to potentially be rejected. I really think that that's really where it boils down to. And I think that a lot of people feel that way, whereas like if I pick up the phone and call someone, what if they don't answer? What if they don't want to talk to me? What if the conversation takes too long? We have all these what ifs that we create around these scenarios versus, taking back our own power and going, you know what, I'm going to reach out to this person. I really connected with them. I really enjoyed their presence, and that's going to bring me joy in the end. But instead we come at it usually from a fearfulness place, because that again is that hardwired in survival state. It's like if I just don't contact anybody, I won't have to feel these negative feelings.
But it's funny too when you look at it like that. And I mean, psychoanalyze time. Have you ever had those conversations where you call somebody and they're like, I don't have the time for you? Probably not. So again, this is just a thought that's going through your mind, right? And your brain is trying to survive. So it's like, just don't even call, and then we don't have to worry about that. When the reality is, you've probably never actually experienced that.
It's deep-rooted childhood
And
issues.
right. Well, I mean, but I think a lot of us go through that, and there is a fine line, though. I mean, they are realizing that Western psychology is a lot different than some of the other cultures. Who the underpinning of those cultures is all relational, and it's all about family, and it's all about making those connections. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't still um, fear rejection. I mean, because again, false evidence appearing real, right? That's fear. So we all have fears. We all are concerned about being rejected because being rejected means that we're no longer part of the pack, the human pack. And being rejected can mean that you have no one there to help you defend yourself or that you're not going to survive. And so there's definitely a survival element to that. But I think Western culture, especially, I'm living here in the US. I know y'all are in Canada, right? So I think that there is some disconnect here with the people here that other cultures don't necessarily have. Even South or Latin Americans are much better at having interpersonal and interdependent relationships with their family and neighbors and so forth. And that community, that the fiber of those communities and those relationships, again, does help to have long lasting healthy lives, and fulfilling lives for many people. So we're really asking ourselves to step back and look at maybe some of the other cultures and say, well, how can we include some of these aspects, these positive things, into our culture that we're in now? That's my take on it.
I was listening to a live stream this morning, and they were talking about manifestation, but they were talking about how a lot of the time in our Western culture, we kind of make empty promises. Like you see somebody that you know on the street, yeah, we should get together for coffee. We kind of create these like ideas like, yeah, we should do this, and then we actually lack the action to follow through on it.
Yeah, the
right?
action steps.
And what she said is she's living in Italy, and so she said, when I moved from the US to Italy, it was totally different. I saw somebody I knew there, and I said, hey, we should get together for coffee. And she said the lady turned around and said, okay, when would you like to go?
Right.
And she's like, I didn't even know how to react to that because nobody's ever followed up with me, right?
Especially immediately.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I think that that's where, like, that is part of the disconnect is, like, we make these empty promises, whether it be to others or to ourselves or whatever, and we don't always follow through on it. And I think that that's where you were talking about, like, stepping back and looking at the whole situation. And how do we create that longevity, that greater purpose for our lives? And I think that comes from defining what it is that you want out of life. If relationships are important to you, then start taking action on those relationships.
Making time for it too. The biggest thing that you hear from everybody is they don't have enough time, right? That's the most common excuse you'll hear for everything is, I don't have enough time in my day. When the reality is, if you want it enough, you'll make time for it. There's ways to make time for anything in life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that also ties into hope because, when it comes to relationships and making time for those relationships, what you receive, the benefit that you get out of those experiences is far greater than the lack of time, or whatever you're lacking at that point. I think Desmond Tutu, who recently passed, he actually talked about hope, and it's a lot easier to have hope whenever you have people around you in your community, if you have your tribe, if you will, who kind of help you push forward and propel you, and they nourish you in those relationships, and they give you that encouragement. And so I think all of it is very important. And it's not just about feel-good conversations like this one, but it's really about how can I implement hope into small achievable goals? How can I implement it into my daily breakfast? How can I manifest hope into my drive to work? You have to really shift your perspective on, hey, I hate this traffic, and oh, the snow is 20 feet tall. We don't have that problem in Texas, by the way, but this is a nightmare kind of situation that you're dealing with all the snow. But you have to really transform your mind into thinking about things as a gift and as a little puzzle, and how can I really utilize this opportunity to be more hopeful, to be more joyful, to have little successes that lead up to the big successes in our lives, whether it's physical, emotional, in our careers, in our relationships, what have you. So that's what I think anyway.
Do you think that starts with setting an intention, like coming at it with an intention or a greater understanding of what you're expecting out of it? Or do you think that comes with just shifting our focus through, like, all the time throughout the day? Like when you're driving and you're like, oh, all these drivers are, totally in my way, whatever the thought is that's coming into mind, and refocusing, or going into the drive with the intention of, this is going to be a great drive, I'm going to focus on my breath, I'm really going to enjoy the experience.
I actually think those are two different things, but you can't have one without the other. If I can go back to my analogy of the seeds and the soil, I think the intention is the seed. And I think that, the ability to shift your mindset and have those positive thoughts, I think that's part of the growth process. And so, yeah, I think you need both. And I can say for sure, you and I talked about this a while ago. I actually created a format for my clients where I call it the cake method, and we go through each level of their goal, whatever it is, to really find the root cause or the root reason, or the intention, if you will. I think you used the 7 levels, which I know is popular, and that's a similar setup, but it really does help you to understand that, wow, it's not that I want these brand new shoes because they're going to go great with my outfit. It's like, I want these shoes because then I'll feel confident in my outfit. And if I go to this event, it's because I want to connect with all these people. But, it's kind of like you just got to go deeper. And then what you're really looking for at the end of the day is to be loved and accepted, and to also be able to offer that to other people. And so the shoes become much more important, and you're much more likely to do what you have to achieve and to buy them, right? I'm not saying that you should go out and buy shoes and justify it with your.
Don't give her ideas.
That bring me so much more love into my life, and don't do that. But as a small example, yeah, I think you need both.
So when it comes to creating that longevity in our lives and defining the life that we always truly want, one exercise that we've often done with clients, we call the eulogy exercise. So writing your eulogy, how do you want to be remembered? And that really stems from the example of Alfred Nobel, and how he had mistaken the news had mistaken his identity. So his brother had passed, and they actually wrote about Alfred Nobel and how he invented, was it dynamite?
Yeah.
Explosives, and how he had killed millions of people in the war. And he had read his eulogy, and he's like, wow, I'm a terrible person. But he went on to change his entire life because of that, and creating the Nobel Peace Prize and all of those things. And so often what we'll do with clients is we'll say, write your eulogy.
What do you want to be remembered for?
What do you want to be remembered for? When we have that, and we have a guiding principle, is like, what do I want out of this life? What is my vision? Then we can begin to work backwards and go, these are the steps I need to take in order to create this into my reality.
It's reverse engineering your ideal life, right? It's taking what you want the end goal to be, and then what steps do you need to get there, and then start building
Because
up.
I think a lot of people, we are reactive. It's like, this took place in my life, so I do this. This took place in my life, so I do this. And we get to the end of our life and we recap on the whole thing, and it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe if I had changed it or been a little bit more proactive, my life would have been different. Rather than living in a what if, we live in I get to choose my destiny.
Yeah, creating it.
Right. Absolutely. Everything you say, I agree with. And I actually do also use the eulogy exercise in a lot of my leadership training. So it's a very effective way to really get people in touch with what their core values are and what really matters in their life today. And I love, Mike, your reverse engineering. That's exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm. It's all about our core values and how we begin to define that and the perception around that, and holding that hope. If you don't hold that flame inside of you, that desire, that greater purpose, that hope inside of you, then we really don't have a driving force. We really get to the end and we're like, that was it?
Yeah. And let me close with this because I think we've talked about so many different things here. I can only imagine listening to this. People are going to be like, "What? Where do I go with that?" I want to give you a personal story, if I may. I am a caregiver, and in addition to everything else that I do, I am caring for someone who is in hospice, and it's a very difficult place to be mindset-wise as a caregiver because there's a lot of hopelessness in this situation. There is no end of life, revival or significant goals that are going to be achieved here. It's all death basically. And so as a caregiver, kind of watching the process and holding his hand throughout this different stages of life, it's been interesting and very, very challenging for me to stay in a healthy mental place for myself, for my family, and for our loved one who's going through this. But what I realized one day, and I was having a real difficult time transitioning him into hospice care, and the decision was mostly on my shoulders, and I had a lot of guilt and a lot of uh, fear and depression around that. And I started to think really deeply about what is the purpose of this? Why is God putting this on my plate? And I realized in that thought process that a lot of people who have been prisoners of war have talked about hope and how when they research the people who have perished as prisoners of war versus those that thrived and survived, often it was the ability to hope that really was the defining difference between those two groups, and the ability to hope that tomorrow will bring something better, or that there really is a bigger picture in this puzzle, and that what I'm dealing with right now is difficult. There is more to life. And so from my personal experience, I got to that place where I was able to shift my perspective on this situation and realize that the hope in this situation for my loved one is that he's helped me to create a legacy for him, and that now we are helping other people who are near the end of their life and offering them nourishment and care and coaching to the caregivers. And if he hadn't gone through this process, and if I hadn't been with him, that we would never be able to touch so many people, and we've touched many dozens of people and hundreds actually across the globe. And so it's really I think important that people realize that it doesn't matter the situation that you're in. The things that we're talking about are relevant for big life problems, but they're relevant for day-to-day tasks that you have to deal with as well. And if you can extract some of the great things that you guys put on your podcasts or that has come from this conversation and just take one thing and see if you can implement that into your life, I think that can be the beginning for your listeners to start really engaging in meaningful change in their lives, hopefully in the right direction.
I absolutely love that. It's all about that beacon of hope and holding that so dear to our hearts. I know that Mike and I have both been to a concentration camp when we were in Germany, and we have heard the stories of hope and how imperative that is to your survival in general. And I think that that plays so nicely into everything that our world is experiencing right now. We can join together in our universal language of love, and by joining together in love we can all share hope and unity. And I think that that is the takeaway from this entire episode, really.
Yes,
Thank you so much for joining us. This has been truly, truly a blessing and an honor to have you on the podcast and to share your knowledge and expertise and your message. And I think that this is a message that needs to be spread far and wide.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for all your listeners out there. I appreciate their time, and I hope that they're able to gain some really awesome little nuggets out of this conversation.
So if people were looking to get in contact with you, whether it be for, your coaching, I know that you guys have a great setup for for caregivers, and creating meals for caregivers or meals for, is it for the caregivers? You can correct me on that.
In my local community, yeah, we've begun offering meals to both caregivers and people that are seniors of all stages, and then of course patients that are near the end of their journey. So we do a little bit of that, but globally, I do coaching for anybody really, but especially caregivers who are struggling with stress. And your audience members can certainly find me online. I have scaled back a bit on my social media because I do have a very full schedule. So, but you can find me on Facebook, find me on LinkedIn. NasyimSegal.com is out there right now. I need to update it a little bit, but I'm available. If you want to Google me, you'll find me.
We will link it all through in the show notes so that way anybody can just scroll below and just click onto it so that they can get in contact with you if they, want coaching services or even just more information on how to show up as a caregiver. I think that that's so critical as we move here through our aging years.
Thank you.
If you loved today's podcast and found value in the information provided, please feel free to reach out to Nasyim at NasyimSegal.com. That's NasyimSegal.com. You can also find her on Facebook and LinkedIn. You can also check out our show notes on our website, www.ironbodycoach.com, or click below this episode and you will find the show notes there as well. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please reach out to us. We would love to support you on your journey to becoming the best version of yourself. Have an amazing rest of your day.